A congressional delegation traveled to Poland this past weekend to witness and gather information about the Ukrainian refugee crisis firsthand. Bringing a member of that CODEL recently returned from Eastern Europe, a Republican member of the House Oversight Committee's South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Welcome back, Congresswoman. Good to see you.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
Can you give us a sense of exactly how things are proceeding there at the border? It looks like, to the outward view that Poland is being very generous in taking in as many people as it possibly can.
They absolutely are, and the courageousness of Poland and its people welcoming millions of Ukrainian families, mostly women and children, because their husbands and fathers stayed behind in Ukraine to fight for their country, to fight for freedom, and to fight for democracy. It was a devastating thing to see, but you also saw Poland coming together and offering these families shelter, offering their children education to go to school every day. It's quite a remarkable feat, and they've welcomed over 2 million families and counting, and things at the border are only getting worse because over 10 million Ukrainians have been displaced. But I will tell you, this visit, seeing it firsthand, we know that Vladimir Putin is evil, and we saw that evil firsthand, and we saw what has happened to all of these families that are now, they're left with no home. And oftentimes, they've got a family that can't get out of many of these cities, Kyiv or Mariupol. We're seeing that live on social media. It's devastating, and we saw it firsthand while we were there this weekend.
I want to ask you about a couple of headlines tonight. This one from the Washington Post says, top Russian military leaders repeatedly decline calls from U.S., prompting fears of, quote, sleepwalking into war. They say it's leaving the world's two largest nuclear powers in the dark about explanations for military movements and raising fears of a major miscalculation or battlefield accident. Your take?
Well, I think it's really important, and I want to say one thing about President Biden's trip to the region, and I support that trip. We want our NATO allies to know that the United States supports them, and we have tens of thousands, almost 100,000 troops in the region. They've been there for a long time, and they're there to promote peace, to help with the humanitarian crisis, and to show support for our NATO allies who are very worried about what Russia might do. And I think that Vladimir Putin has talked about using nuclear warheads, and I think that is a very real risk. And I've urged my colleagues coming out of this trip to Poland to be very careful about not escalating things and making it worse with our rhetoric or tweeting a war strategy that might, cause this thing to go out of control. We need to be very thoughtful and mindful about what we're saying and how we're saying it, to urge peace and to urge an off-ramp in this thing.
Wall Street Journal editorial board seems to think there's more that we can be doing. It says Ukraine can win with enough help. They say President Biden is rightly outraged by Mr. Putin's brutality, and he calls him a war criminal, but he still seems afraid of doing what it takes to defeat him. What more do you think we could or should be doing?
More sanctions, 100%. There are hundreds of million-dollar valued yachts that are still floating out there in the sea that could be taken in. We saw that there's one in Italy this week that's owned by Vladimir Putin, isolating the oligarchy around Putin, ensuring that we isolate Putin and Russia economically in every way, shape, or form, and that our allies, partners, and friends around the world do the same. Talking with Xi Jinping and China, ensuring they don't do or broker a deal with Russia on oil and gas imports or exports to give him the funding he needs to continue this war. And I was really heartened and encouraged today to read the media reports of Ukrainian soldiers who were taking back suburbs in Kyiv and other places, reports of Russian soldiers running out of food. These are all good developments in the right direction, and as long as they're provided defense equipment and arms and munitions to defend their homeland, I believe that what we're seeing now are successes of that fruit. And that's really encouraging for the Ukrainian people. And President Zelensky was out tonight with a new video showing that courageousness, that heroism that we see with the Ukrainian soldiers and the men who stayed behind to fight for their homeland.
And quickly, we continue against this backdrop to remind viewers that there's also a negotiation going on with a new version of the Iran nuke deal. Russia is at the table, leading that conversation at the time that the U.S. and much of the international community talks about isolating them. You've signed on to this letter by one of your colleagues in the House talking about Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the consideration potentially that it would be removed from a terrorism list as part of this deal. Can you give us a quick comment on that?
Well, I mean, Iran is dangerous, and having Russia at the table is very dangerous when we're talking about nuclear, talking about Iran getting resources to be able to build a nuclear outfit in their country. You know, Iran is not a friend to the United States, neither is Venezuela, and there's some question about what direction China is headed in because they've been very neutral in this thing. And so it's very concerning what is happening on the world stage, and we need to ensure that America is strong, our leaders are strong, and I believe Vladimir Putin is the one guy that can unite our country and unite the world together. And that's what we're seeing today, but we need to do more, obviously, and work together in that effort and put pressure on the White House in that endeavor as well.
Yeah, and if you're right about that, it will certainly not be what Putin had wanted to do, but he is creating a lot of many tighter bonds, it seems, between allies, NATO, Europeans, and others. Congresswoman, thank you for being with us tonight and for telling us about what's going on in Poland as well.